Great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos RPG, and today on Games Master's Toolbox, we're going to be looking at the one tool you need to make your role-playing games the best they can possibly be. Before we get started, make sure you go down below and hit all the buttons so that the algorithm will know that you're part of our audience, and let's get started.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame. Our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Alrighty, welcome back. And today we're going to be talking about the Director's Asset Binder, also known as the Community Information Sheet, or CIS. This is available from Nikos RPG at our Play Now section, and I will put a link directly below so you can access that. If you haven't yet, make sure you register to that site, because that way you'll be able to get information and updates on the products as they are released. I'll also put information on how to get a hold of all 6 of the pre-release volumes. We will be going to a crowdfunding process a little bit later in this year with the idea of being able to release by Origins. So for more information on all of that, make sure you also check out patreon.com/Nikos and learn how you can become part of our community. All right, so let's get started. The Director's Asset Builder, the concept of the community identity sheet is that it will give you a one-stop shop, so to speak, for all information that your players will want to know about a particular community. Now, what is a community? That's a great question, and in particular, I'm specifying it as the area of operation wherein the players find themselves for an extended period of time. For example, it may be their hometown, or it might be their hideout if they are a band of hooligans, or if they are travelers, it could be their encampment. One of the reasons to have a CIS is so that your players can become familiar with their area and be aware of the parameters, the laws, the outlines and guidelines of the community, so that they can counteract the tendency towards what is known as the murder hobo syndrome. Not every group does this, but generally speaking, a group of adventurers whose sole operation is going around and killing monsters tend to find themselves unaccountable to most resources around them, and so therefore they fundamentally act as hobos, wandering from location to location without any real feeling of identity to the communities that they are in. And the CIS, the Community Identity Sheet, is the easiest way to separate the community out and be able to define it so that your players can really get a feel for what their locale and their community is, and therefore interact with it. So we're going to be looking at the actual form itself. Now, as I am a theater of the mind game master, to me it seems more logical for me to provide you with information about the sheet and have you looking at it yourself so you can make the connections, rather than me providing a screenshot and you just hand-waving your way past the data. Instead, I want to internalize each piece that we go through on the page so that you have a better understanding. So if you need to, stop this video right now, go down to nikosrpg.com and download the CIS. Now, you will need to register for the site so that we can keep in touch with one another, and more importantly, so that you can be brought up to date when new information becomes available about the property. So before we get started, make sure you go down and get yourself a copy of the CIS. Once you've got that established, then go ahead and press play as it would be on this video, and we'll get started. All right, so the very first thing we're going to look at on the CIS is the section that is annotated as the locality attributes. That is to say, which parts of the location have impact on the development of your scene. So in this case, you'll see headings like adaptability, responsiveness, ideology, affability, stability, and determination. Now, all of these numbers can be created utilizing the ramp system, which we've talked about in previous episodes, where you roll and then modify the dice in an increasing 5% increment until such time as you fail, and then recording the number at which you were targeting, and that becomes the value for that number. Generally, this will create a number somewhere between, say, 15 and 65. Majority of the answers falling somewhere between 25 and 40. But that of course is a variability sequence, and utilizing the Nikos ramp system, Nikos rolling mechanism, you can also have partial successes and such, so you can give more nuanced answers depending on what your players request. But this form is basically a fill-out form, so you will put in the numbers you feel appropriate for each of these. And the more you know about your locale, the easier this will be for you to simply fill out the sections. So we're going to be looking at this location value, and we'll be looking at the base numbers for it, somewhere again between between 15 and say 65. I have seen particularly astute rollers get higher than this, and I've seen players end up with positively dismal scores. So the more that you're able to build this out individually, the better off you'll be. So for example, under the case of adaptability to the locale, what you're looking for is what the possibility is that the people in this community are going to adapt to the newness of a group of adventurers in their community, how quickly they will respond and react, and to what extent they may change their own lives to accommodate this new set of variables. And adaptability can be a positive or a negative. A group may be adaptive but prefer to become more standoffish. So it's really, these are all measures that you as a game master will use to your best benefit. And so therefore they're only providing numeric identity to the community in terms of the complete wholeness of this document. So the second part, responsiveness, has to do with how quickly they react to influences. Ideology is what their basic standoffish, what their level of interaction is, and whether or not they have a series of guidelines, or ideas that they're going to hold to over the period of time that the players are interacting. Affability is their social skill, how well they get along with others, how quickly they are going to be able to bring the players, if you will, to be among them. Stability is how dependable they can be, and determination is how willing they are to take action. Each one of these is going to be a numeric outcome, whether you use the ramp process or you actually just point and click or put the numbers in that you desire. One thing to remember is that the Nikos mechanism also uses Spectrocalatin, a 6-step system between 15% and 75%, 15% and 90% in terms of likelihood of action. And so therefore, knowing that scale, you can then determine these numbers if you choose to simply place them. The second part we're going to talk about is I'm on the wrong page. That's okay. On to the next section. The next section we're going to look at is the cartographic details. And the cartographic details really is a fancy way of saying what is visual about this location. Now, in the theater of the mind, of course, you're building this imagery specifically in terms of descriptive terms. So when you are talking about the location type, are you talking about a hamlet, a village, a city, a megalopolis? What kind of community are we talking about? Now, in certain cases, you may simply be talking about someplace out in the wilds, in which case this would be location type of nil or remote or isolated. And the idea is that you're creating verbal structure to the community so that your players can embrace and interact with it appropriately. So if you call it a village, they have a certain mental picture of the way they expect a village to interact, whether or not there are town guards. Obviously, a town would have more organizational structure, say, than a village. And so the idea of guards or wardens or protectors are really terms that the players are going to want to embrace. And so by coming up with a mechanical value for this location, a type of defining term, makes it easier for them to interact with the community. A relative position is, again, because we're talking about in the abstracts of operating in theater of the mind, where is this relatively located? Are we near a coastline or are we far inland? Are we on a rising terrain? Is it becoming more broken, or is it undulating hills? The idea of relative position is in comparison with other population centers. So, for example, if they've been in a city but they're traveling outward from that, then perhaps your relative positioning description will simply say that several hours back is the edges of the city that you were in before, but now you're out here in the wilderness, in the more rural areas. This gives them a perspective on where they are. It doesn't necessarily have to be hard-lined, and the more theater of mind you operate, the more fluffy this kind of a term can be. Next is means of access, and means of access is going to refer to the kinds of roadways and passages, the kinds of, for example, if you have lighter than air craft, balloons and dirigibles and such, you'll have means of access will include that. If you have you're in a remote location where the roads are very rugged, perhaps your means of access is very, very limited and only has, a few footpaths and such that lead into the community. These kinds of terms help to get a visual for the players on how specifically remote or away from the beaten path they are, which will allow them to feel the appropriate levels of pressure that such things might put on them. If they are, for example, traveling with a wagon, if they are in a place with remote access and they made it with the wagon, that may be problematic in the future should weather turn bad and things like that. So just realize that whatever you are determining for the ways of access or the means of access are things that the players are going to be wanting to push against at some point in the future. Next would be your population density, and this is really a measure of how many people per square inch, per mile, per hectare. The idea is that if you are with a high population density but you're only in a village, that would mean that they are close-knit group and isolated somewhat from one another, and therefore their population density may be high on a per building basis, meaning they have extended families and things like that, but they perhaps don't have connections with the other structures within the community. If, on the other hand, you've got a relatively high population density and a large city structure, then you're talking myriads of people and almost no privacy, and likelihood of running into authorities and those who are involved with the communication of that community are going to be much higher. Next, we're going to talk about social integration. And when we talk about social integration, what we're referring to is how communicative the individuals in this community are with each other. If they are highly integrated, it means they share each other's locations. Perhaps they don't have locks on their doors, and they're perfectly okay with individuals who are not their family members being in their personal spaces, and social integration therefore could be a relatively high figure in spite of the weaknesses of the details of it. A highly social integrated society everyone will know everybody else's business almost all the time. And then finally, you'll talk about the aggression of the community. And aggression here doesn't necessarily mean violence, but it does mean that they are actively integrating with each other or with one another. And the idea of aggression means that they are active. They want to know what's going on within their community, who's there, why they're there, how they come to be there, and that kind of situation. Again, these numbers can be ramped, or if you've got an idea of the community you're trying to build, utilizing the Spectracolitan scale, 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, and 90, that sliding scale can give you pretty good intensity levels for each one of these. And my recommendation is try to keep no more than one or two of them near the maximums, because it begins to lose meaning when you don't have a clear handle on what each one of them might be. Next, we're going to use a much more generic set of terms. We have the terms settings, scenes, and personalities. And what these are referring to is places and locales that are going to be important to the story, and your short list of the personalities the players may interact with. This does not necessarily match one-to-one with your NPCs or even your story rated personalities, but this gives you at least a place to start keeping track of who these individuals are and to what locations and what conditions they might be found. By having such, you're giving yourself the room to maneuver when the players are asking questions to determine who might be accessible to them for this information and to bring them what they feel that they need to gather from the particular encounter. Okay, next we're going to talk about the community attributes. And the community attributes can vary a lot. Generally, your attributes are the equivalent, if you will, to the numbers that you might see on a persona. They're going to be things like in the case of the CIS, you'll find these as the aesthetic appeal, cultural isolation, material wealth, self-sufficiency, sophistication, and trade relevance. And each of these is not directly one-to-one related with an attribute, but they are the way you measure a community's value internally. That is to say, if you have a high aesthetic appeal to a community, it's a place that's nice visually. It's a pretty location. Generally, of course, these places have some particular artifact or location that is near it that gives it this relevance, but it could just simply be the roll of the hills or the way the mountain catches the light in the evenings. And again, these can be ramped or they can be chosen piece by piece, depending on how much you have developed in your mind of what this community looks like. This also means that you're going to deal with isolation. Are the people in this village so tight-knit that they only are involved with their particular culture, or are they open to investigating something new and interesting from outside? Are they materially wealthy? Does the location generate revenue from some form of effort on their part, whether it be mining or farming or raising of animals? This level of their cultural isolation really gives a solid grasp on how much they believe themselves to be separate from the rest of the world. If they are very open and have a very low cultural isolation, value, that means that they embrace other cultures. Whereas if it's a very high number, it means that they're very insular and like their safety and identity and security. Material wealth, same thing. Low material wealth doesn't mean that they are poor people. They may find what they have to be adequate, and if the environment and the considerations of what is valuable to them is measured greatly, then even material wealth can fall to the wayside in terms of actual value. In addition, you may be looking at a self-sufficient community where their resources have made it so that they feel adequate and feel appropriate about what they own, so that they are unafraid of having to make decisions without external support. The next, of course, would be the sophistication, and a high sophistication of a community tends to lend itself to materialism, but may not. In particular, if they are well versed in, say, their own rituals and their own religions, perhaps their level of sophistication can be high, even as their material worth may be low. So realize that these numbers are fundamentally each a separate sliding scale, and you as the game master can determine them in advance and give a hard number to these, or you can allow them to be fluid and random depending on, say, the type, the season and such. Now we're going to talk a little bit about resource availability. And when we speak of resources in particular, what we're talking about is whether or not the players can find things in town. It also tends to also associate with the types of careers and obligations that the players might find accessible in this community. So if they are investigators, or they are in particular the exploratory kind, they might find a searcher's value of this community to be low, and therefore their jobs to be in high demand, whereas perhaps they are dime a dozen and there are a great number of resources available. And so the ramped values of these literally are saying how many peoples of these different adventure tropes would be available in the community, or would be able to converse on equal footing with the players. And of course, again, these numbers may be ramped, or they could be absolutely set by you. And the utilization, for example, of the spectaculatin process for these can set your community up to be looking forward to the players adventuring through their town, and make them much more favorable to the players' advances, whereas it may be instead they've got really high values of these things and don't really see much of a need for interaction. So it's a great way to set your sights well in advance of when the players get there, so no matter what kind of a direction they want to go, you can accommodate them. Next, we're going to talk about economic balance. Ooh, we jumped all the way to economic balance. Well, economic balance is referring to high, middle, low class, and you can pretty much forego this if your adventures are occurring in an isolated area where only one of them might apply. So, for example, if you're out in the hinterlands of nobles' properties, the majority of the people found will be low or middle class, and much more on the low than on the middle class. But that depends on the culture and identity you have for your community. Are there nobles that live out this far in the wilderness, or is this perhaps a resort to which they retire? All these things are taken account of by determining what the economic balance in the area are, and therefore providing the players with the possible resources for the actions they want to entertain. And next, I'm going to kind of talk about two different things. I don't know how I missed that. I must have two down. Right? No? Did I just simply roll over it? No? Pardon me. No, we're good. I'll have to clip that out of my final. Next would be the occupations and trades, and these would be NPCs of particular note that have a particular set of skills. And these can be created in advance, or you could actually create them on the spot, depending on what the players require and whether or not they've reached that kind of a access favorably. In other words, if they have not been able to find anybody of a resource, you might perhaps create an NPC in particular that has the kind of trades and skills that they're looking for, and therefore you have a place to put that on the sheet. As I've said before, if you are a creator and you've already built a lot of these things for yourself, having a place to put this information where it can be maintained session over session is really helpful, because once now you have a location for, say for example, a blacksmith who is particularly good at as a farrier, then the adventuring groups might actually go from one village to another, from one community to another, in order to take advantage of this person's skill. Now, we talked about economic balance, so that's what happened is I got a duplicate screen. That's what happened. So let me go back here for just a second, and I'm going to talk about cultural estates. The idea is that when you're going from community to community, there are certain resources that a community might have that would allow players to take advantage of the very things they picked up when they were very, very first starting their character. These estates or place identifiers can be identified on your community identity sheet, so the players know that this is a place where they can come back and practice, say, their tea ceremony, or their ancestry research, or lifting the biggest boulder in the county. Any of these provide them with a way to tap into the skills that they only accessed at the beginning of the game, and by having just a couple or three or four of these at each location, you give the players a reason to want to visit that community. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is relative positioning, and we've talked about this considerably when we're talking about the world in around 80 days, the idea of building your maps so that you start with a central location, build what's north, what's south, what's east, what's west, and then from that knowledge being able to branch out and build and expand your world more and more. Well, this relative positioning also applies in your city development, because when you are in a community, if you're going to go, say, northward to visit the local church, are we talking several blocks, or is it just a short distance up there? And if there is an extensive amount of distance between the locations, what else is between there? And this starts to fill in for you that location and making your game world feel more real because it's more filled in. And by only using north of, south of as relative locations, when you place the information on the sheet, you can determine how easy it is to get there by how close in you put it on the list, and the things that are more difficult to get to or harder to find, perhaps down some side streets or whatever, you put farther and farther up on the lists. And by utilizing this relative positioning, then the players start to get a feel for, from their current position, how long it will take for them to get from one location to another, even to the point where you often won't have to worry about building that yourself. Your players will fill it in for you. So in covering all of this, the CIS as a tool is the only one that you'll really ever need. Of course, you can build and expand and broaden and depth and increase the utility of this by adding more and more information. Remember that the very actions of the players interacting with the community will have an effect on that community, and that can be done by modifying the numbers. That is to say, if the players come into town and they drop a large amount of treasure from a loot haul that they bring into town, that's going to change the economic standing within the town, and then as that money funnels around within the local community, you'll be able to see changes in the community over time, and therefore consider utilizing the community identity sheet much like a character sheet, and therefore tracking the players' interactions with it in a way that shows it is morphing and adapting to their location and their interaction, just as they are improving their numbers as they interact with the NPCs and the monsters they find within each setting. All right, I think that I've covered everything I was going to cover. I hope that I did. Make sure that if you haven't before, check out nikosrpg.com for information on the game. There will be information on how to get a hold of the pre-release copies that are available now, and more information will be available at patreon.com/Nikos about our community and how to become a part of what we're doing. Until the next time, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time, and don't forget what Granddad always says, go play.